Do not let your hearts be troubled. These are the words we hear, or I hear, especially as a pastor, at funerals. Funerals when we gather to strengthen our hearts for the work of living that still lies before us. We gather to say the truth. We gather to say goodbye. We sit together in the midst of grief and loss. Whether the death we are looking at was long and unexpected, or sudden and terrible, it is still and always heartbreaking. We sit on this side of life and wonder, what is there across this great divide? This, it seems to me, is the most human experience of all. We ignore it. We hide it under the rug. We pretend that somehow this death thing, well, that won't happen to me or to those I love. Until, of course, it does, sooner or later. I remember when I was a little girl first learning about death. There was a lot of death in my first few years before I knew anything about it. My young Aunt Margie, my mother's sister, died tragically at 30 years old. This was just 1 month before my first birthday. Then her father, my grandfather, died a few years later. I'm sure he died of grief. But then, when I was about 4, a pet turtle died. I asked my mother, when I died, to just put me in a chair on our wide deck above the flowers and the trees and cover me with leaves. Maybe, in some way, that will happen. We will be covered with leaves and earth and dirt, living and dying things. This is just who we are, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We are made of earth, and to earth we shall return. But even at the grave we sing our song, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. We who are Christians know that somehow death no longer has a permanent hold on us. Now, I don't believe in some heaven with fluffy clouds, but there is something that somehow will hold us all. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. My prayer for us all is that in these days, our ability to perceive and experience God's presence will be expanded. We have had many illusions, many distractions, simply ripped away. But perhaps these were false things. They were things we didn't need anyway. The real grief we feel, I know, is the diminishment of human contact and belonging. It is almost impossible to bear. My grandchildren are passing these days mostly without me. I have not managed these computer pathways very well. But it is in their absence that I have become keenly aware of how much they matter. And I miss all of you so much. As I prepare to speak to you each week, I read different reflections on the Sunday readings, and I sometimes borrow from them. Sometimes it doesn't touch me that deeply, but once in a while it does. This week I read a reflection by Lindsay Jodry from Princeton Theological Seminary. In her writing, she quoted at length a friend of hers, also a professor, Dr. Erin Rafferty. It seems that Dr. Rafferty is the mother of a young girl, Lucia, who has a terminal illness and many other complications. When I read Dr. Rafferty's words, I knew that she had said everything I wished to say about vulnerability, about fragility, about strength, suffering, and hope. And I will leave these last words to her. Dr. Rafferty says, I don't want to live with a false security that my child will always be there. Instead, with the full knowledge of life's impermanency, we can choose to love even more fiercely, generously, lavishly. For many people, and importantly, the living and loving to be done in these days includes showing up as scientists, doctors, nurses, emergency responders to those who are suffering and dying. But for the rest of us, there will be the equally hard and important work of loving fiercely, praying, honoring, and naming the dead, and not shying away from grief and fear, but embracing them and their pain in patience and hope that love will survive. Our naivete may be gone. Grief and death may be more and more evident these days, but perhaps there is salvation to be found. While we can't save ourselves, may we be reminded that the God who saves has been unleashed in the world as love incarnate, and love will conquer death. Love will find a way.